The Japanese Hornet's nest on Bougainville was not just any defensive position. It was a masterpiece of engineering and strategy. This complex of bunkers was built with such strength and care that standard artillery bombardments had almost no effect on it. Even the best efforts of aerial reconnaissance failed to locate it, as it was cleverly camouflaged into the surrounding terrain. To make matters worse for any attackers, the defenders had designed the area with overlapping fields of fire, which meant that any soldiers trying to approach on foot would be caught in a deadly crossfire long before they could get close. It became clear to the United States military that defeating such a stronghold would require a new kind of weapon, something that could advance through a storm of bullets, resist small arms fire, and eliminate entrenched enemies hidden deep in the earth. On January 30th, 1944, the U.S. took a bold step. 5 specially modified Stuart tanks began rolling toward the Hornet's nest. These weren't ordinary tanks equipped with cannons or machine guns. Instead of relying on traditional weapons, they carried a far more fearsome tool of destruction. What they unleashed was horrifying, not just for those watching from the outside, but especially for anyone trapped within the tunnels. These tanks turned the underground fortifications, once thought to be impenetrable shelters, into fiery tombs. Their presence marked a dramatic change in how the U.S. dealt with heavily defended enemy positions. In the early days of the conflict, the United States had not planned to be drawn into another massive global war. But once the attack on Pearl Harbor forced America into World War II, military leaders quickly realized they were unprepared in one brutal area of warfare: the use of flamethrowers. Both Germany and Japan had already made significant advances in this terrifying weapon category. The U.S., on the other hand, had little experience with them. Reports from the battlefield, especially from the Pacific Islands, began to reveal the intense and savage nature of close-quarters combat. American soldiers were often forced to root out Japanese defenders from deep caves, bunkers, and narrow trenches, sometimes with nothing more than grenades and rifles. This sparked a sense of urgency to develop a flamethrower of their own. The answer came in the form of the M1 flamethrower, which was introduced in 1941. This weapon was compact and could be carried by a single soldier, designed specifically for the brutal task of flushing out enemy fighters from hiding. The concept was simple, but devastating. A burst of fire would be sprayed into tight spaces, forcing enemies to flee or perish. The design featured 2 tanks of gasoline mounted on the user's back, which were linked to a pressurized nitrogen tank. A hose led to a handheld nozzle equipped with a basic ignition system. In perfect conditions, it could shoot a stream of flaming fuel about 20 yards, but battle conditions were rarely perfect. The M1 had several critical flaws. Its ignition system, which relied on either a small flame or an electric spark, often malfunctioned in harsh environments. Rain, humidity, and strong winds could easily prevent it from igniting. In some cases, operators had to improvise, using cigarette lighters or matches to get the flame going, an extremely dangerous move in the middle of combat. Fuel flow was inconsistent, and the pressure was frequently too low to deliver an effective blast. When the equipment failed, it left the operator dangerously exposed and without a working weapon. Worse still, the possibility of leaks or technical malfunctions meant that soldiers could be burned by their own gear. All of this made flamethrower operators incredibly vulnerable, even before enemy bullets began flying their way. With the heavy weight of the equipment, over 60 pounds when fully loaded, and their slow, exposed movements on the battlefield, they became obvious targets and were often singled out by enemy troops. Despite its many flaws, the M1 flamethrower proved to be a game-changer. In the Pacific, Japanese forces were masters at using natural and man-made hiding spots to resist attacks for as long as possible. These defensive positions were often invisible to bombers or artillery units, rendering conventional bombardment almost useless. Flamethrowers could do what bombs and bullets couldn't: reach into tight, hidden places with a stream of fire that left no room for escape. The main challenge now was figuring out how to use this destructive tool while protecting the soldier who operated it. By the late summer of 1943, training exercises for flamethrower operators were underway on New Caledonia. It was there that a new idea began to take shape, an idea that would reshape battlefield tactics in the Pacific Theater. An officer from the 754th Tank Battalion observed just how difficult and dangerous it was for foot soldiers to carry and use flamethrowers in actual combat. He suggested a radical alternative. Instead of sending a soldier in on foot, why not install a flamethrower inside a tank? The turret of an M3A1 Stuart tank could provide the protection needed while delivering the same firepower, allowing the weapon to be fired through one of the tank's side ports. The name of the person who first proposed this isn't known for certain, though many believe it was Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Hart, the commander of the battalion. The idea wasn't polished or even guaranteed to work, but it was bold, and it offered a possible solution to a deadly problem. When the idea was tested, however, the difficulties became apparent almost immediately. The Stuart light tank was already small and tight inside. Cramming a full flamethrower system into its interior was a challenge, to say the least, but the potential benefits were too great to ignore. The desperate fighting on New Georgia in July 1943 made it clear that tanks equipped with flamethrowers were badly needed. Engineers got to work at a repair depot near Noumea, New Caledonia. They began by shortening the M1A1 flamethrower's barrel and redesigning the fuel tanks to fit inside the Stuart. 2 5-gallon gas tanks were installed, one underneath the gunner's seat and another in place of the machine gun ammunition storage. The flamethrower's nozzle was then positioned into a mount where a .30 caliber machine gun once sat. By October, these experimental tanks were completed and delivered to the 3rd Marine Tank Battalion. A high-stakes demonstration was arranged near Noumea to show what this new weapon could do. Officers from the United States, Australia, and New Zealand all gathered to witness the results. What they saw was unlike anything they had seen before, a tank that didn't fire bullets or shells, but waves of searing flame capable of clearing out enemy positions with terrifying efficiency. Time was running out fast as the date for the Bougainville landings approached. The operation was set for November 1st, and there was a great sense of urgency because the newly developed flamethrower tanks were expected to play a key role. These specialized tanks were supposed to lead the assault against deeply entrenched Japanese positions, clearing the way for infantry to move forward. However, despite the intense preparations and the critical importance of their mission, the tanks were not ready when the first American soldiers stormed the beaches. It wasn't until January 1944, 2 full months after the initial landings, that these flame-equipped tanks finally made their combat debut during a renewed push by the U.S. Army to expand the perimeter they held on the island. The 754th Tank Battalion had already been active in the Pacific Theater for nearly 2 years by that time. Since early 1942, the unit had gradually evolved from a standard light tank battalion into a far more aggressive force, one that would soon be recognized not just for its firepower, but for the psychological impact it had on enemy forces. Under the determined leadership of Major Reino Lehtinen, a forward element of the battalion arrived on Bougainville, armed with something far more fearsome than just machine guns and shells. These tanks brought with them a new kind of warfare. They didn't just fight, they incinerated, leaving behind trails of fire and destruction that nothing could easily withstand. On the morning of January 30th, 1944, the stage was set for the flamethrower tanks to face their first major combat challenge. The battle zone was a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold along the American-held edge of Bougainville near Empress Augusta Bay. The Japanese had transformed the area into a deadly maze of bunkers and fortified positions. Logs and earth reinforced these structures, turning them into near-impenetrable shelters that bristled with machine guns and rifle fire. The defenses were manned by the 2nd Battalion of the 4th South Seas Garrison and extended for hundreds of yards, stretching from the banks of the Tarokana River all the way to the village of Mavavia. This fortified line posed a direct threat to the stability of the American beachhead and had to be cleared. Earlier attempts by the 132nd Infantry Regiment to break through had ended in frustration and high casualties. The Japanese resistance was fierce and unrelenting. While portable flamethrowers had proven effective in some cases, their short range and the exposure of the operators made them incredibly dangerous to use. Most soldiers carrying these weapons became easy targets for enemy fire before they could even reach a bunker. Recognizing this, General John Hodge, commander of the American Division, decided to bring in reinforcements from the 754th Tank Battalion, which now included several M3A1 Stuart tanks armed with internal flamethrowers. As dawn broke, the battle began with a coordinated assault. At 7:45 in the morning, smoke mortars launched by the 82nd Chemical Mortar Battalion began laying down a thick curtain intended to mask the movements of the advancing troops. Soon after, 81mm mortars and artillery joined the barrage, pounding the Japanese defenses with explosive force. By 8:30, Company C of the 132nd Infantry Regiment began to move forward in formation, advancing behind the protection of the tanks. Just behind them came demolition teams, ready to destroy any remaining enemy fortifications that the tanks didn't manage to neutralize. But the chaos and unpredictability of battle soon showed their face. Just after 9 a.m., one of the leading tanks was tragically hit, not by the enemy, but by an unfortunate instance of friendly fire. An American artillery shell mistakenly struck the Stuart tank, causing it to erupt into flames almost immediately. Inside the vehicle, Tank Commander Sergeant Minor J. Hall was killed, and 2 other crew members were severely wounded. One crewman, Corporal Joe Simon, managed to escape the burning wreck, but in a moment of immense courage, he turned back to try and rescue his wounded comrades. Before he could reach them, he was shot and killed by enemy fire. His selfless actions earned him the Silver Star, awarded posthumously in honor of his bravery. The dangers didn't end there. As Japanese gunfire grew heavier and more intense, another act of heroism unfolded. Staff Sergeant Jesse Drowley from Company B saw the wounded men trapped under fire. Without hesitation and fully aware of the risk, he left cover and ran straight into the open. With bullets slicing through the air just inches above him, he managed to reach the wounded soldiers and pull them to safety, an act that would long be remembered for its raw courage and determination. Despite the terrible cost, the flamethrower tanks began to show why they had been developed in the first place. As they rolled forward through smoke and gunfire, they unleashed a fury that the enemy had no defense against. The tanks led the charge, setting bunkers ablaze and clearing out entrenched positions that had held up earlier assaults. However, even with their thick armor, these machines, and their crews, were not invincible. One of the Stuart tanks came under heavy fire as it approached a Japanese bunker that had pinned down American troops. The tank operator aimed carefully and sprayed the interior of the bunker with liquid fuel, but the flame weapon failed to ignite. In that critical moment, with the battle raging around him, the tank operator made a bold decision. He opened the hatch of his vehicle, exposed himself to enemy fire, and threw a thermite grenade at the soaked bunker. As the grenade exploded, it ignited the fuel in a sudden burst of flame, consuming the interior of the bunker and killing all the Japanese soldiers inside. It was a daring and dangerous move, but it worked, and it showed the kind of split-second thinking and bravery these operators had to rely on. By 10:30 that morning, the Japanese launched a desperate counterattack. Waves of defenders began targeting the tanks directly, throwing Molotov cocktails and launching mortar rounds in a last-ditch effort to stop their advance. The battle was far from over. The attack brought immediate and devastating consequences. Among the first casualties were 2nd Lieutenant John White and Sergeant James Jarman, who were both killed in the early moments of the renewed Japanese assault. In the middle of the chaos, where smoke, fire, and gunfire filled the air, Staff Sergeant Jesse Drowley once again displayed remarkable courage. Amid the confusion and intense enemy fire, he managed to notice something others had missed: a hidden Japanese machine gun nest. Somehow, this enemy position had gone undetected by both the advancing tanks and the supporting infantry, and was now inflicting severe damage on American forces, mowing down soldiers and halting the momentum of the assault. Reacting without hesitation, Drowley dashed through a hail of bullets, risking his life with every step. He ran straight toward the nearest flamethrower-equipped tank, climbed up onto the moving armored vehicle, and began pounding on the turret with the butt of his rifle, urgently trying to get the attention of the crew inside. He pointed furiously in the direction of the enemy position, trying to guide the tank's attention to the deadly machine gun nest that was cutting into their lines. The tank crew responded swiftly, releasing a blast of flames in the direction Drowley had indicated. But due to the chaos of the battlefield and the limited visibility from inside the tank, the flames missed the mark. The hidden machine gunners continued firing, and American soldiers kept falling. Seeing that the danger hadn't been neutralized, Drowley took matters into his own hands once more. He grabbed a submachine gun loaded with tracer rounds, special bullets that left a bright visible trail as they flew through the air, and opened fire toward the hidden nest. Even after being shot in both the chest and the face, Drowley refused to give up. He kept firing his weapon, his tracer rounds drawing a glowing line in the air to show the tank gunners exactly where to aim. His determination paid off. Following the trajectory of Drowley's tracer fire, the flamethrower tank adjusted its aim and unleashed a deadly stream of burning fuel directly at the Japanese position. The enemy machine gun nest was engulfed in a sudden wave of fire, silencing it permanently and saving countless American lives in the process. Despite his serious injuries, Drowley remained on the battlefield. Bloodied and nearly blind from his wounds, he stubbornly refused to be evacuated until he was completely sure the threat had been eliminated and his fellow soldiers were safe. His unwavering courage, fierce determination, and incredible sense of duty earned him the nation's highest military honor. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions, and the decoration was presented to him in person by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a testament to the extraordinary bravery he had shown on that harrowing day. By early afternoon, the flame tanks that had played such a vital role in breaking the Japanese line had to pull back. Each blast of flame from their modified weapons lasted only a few seconds, no more than 20 at a time, so frequent refueling and recharging of their pressurized systems were required to keep them operational. At 1:30 p.m., 5 of the M3A1 tanks returned to the front after being resupplied, immediately rejoining the fight. Working in close coordination with infantry units, they resumed the assault on the remaining bunkers. By the end of the day, they had either destroyed or played a major role in destroying 28 enemy bunkers. Of these, 14 were taken out directly by the flamethrower tanks, while the others were eliminated using a mix of portable flamethrowers, rifle fire, hand grenades, and mortar attacks. The struggle to capture and clear the Hornet's nest marked a major turning point in how the United States military approached armored warfare in the Pacific. The battle clearly demonstrated the power of flame-equipped tanks in rooting out enemies from fortified positions that conventional weapons struggled to breach. This success did not go unnoticed. By the middle of 1944, new tanks were being built from the ground up to carry flamethrowers, specifically for use in future island battles. One such model, nicknamed Satan, would soon enter the battlefield, bringing even greater firepower to the campaign. These specialized tanks were ready just in time for the intense fighting on islands like Saipan and Guam. What had started on Bougainville as a last-minute field modification, born out of necessity and battlefield improvisation, had now become an official part of American combat strategy. The unforgiving jungle terrain and the dug-in resistance of the Japanese had proven to be the perfect conditions for this terrifying combination of armor and fire. Flame tanks, once an experimental weapon, had earned their place in the Pacific War effort. Alongside determined infantry, they became a decisive force in pushing the Japanese out of their hidden strongholds and helping turn the tide in the Pacific theater.